Hello, my lovelies, and welcome to episode 4 of Making a Beautiful Life with me, your host, Valentine. In today's episode, I wanted to make a dress that simply oozes romance. Originally, I wanted this dress to have sort of a 1940s, 1950s sort of vibe, but sometimes projects take on a life of their own and they will begin to tell you who they are. Now, I prefer to listen when they tell me who they are because a lot of the times who they are is so much more beautiful and magnificent than what we initially envision of them. But I know that the creatives out there will understand what I'm saying. So instead of this dress having a 1940s, 1950s vibe, it's a little bit more of a Renaissance, Celtic, cottage, and a meadow vibe. If that makes any sense. For the pattern of my bodice, I'm going to be draping an old sheet over my dress form. And we only need to drape half of this bodice because the design is symmetrical. I drape the fabric and get it as smooth as I possibly can before pinning it. Now, do as I say and not as I do. Before you begin on working anything, you should always wash and iron all of your fabrics first. If you have a washer and a dryer in your home, you have no excuse to skip this step. But I have an excuse to skip this step because I do not have a washer or dryer in my home. That is a hassle. Once I'm happy with how the fabric is laying on the dress form, I start sketching out my pattern pieces. And roughly cutting away excess fabric. But I don't get scissor happy because I want to leave enough fabric to create alterations later on. Just FYI, all of the pattern pieces end at the waist. My creative process may not be particularly clean, pretty, or professional looking, but it works. I am a chaotic spirited person. And you can still be a chaotic spirited person and still make pretty things. It just might have a lot of character. Also, before moving forward, I do want to let you guys know about my dress form. The dress form that I'm using was made from a mold of my body that a friend helped me to create. And while it certainly makes creating patterns a lot easier, it is absolutely not a necessity. But if you have interest in creating a dress form of your own body, I went ahead and linked the video below in the description box. The video is from Morgan Donner. If you happen to love sewing and historical content, you should totally subscribe to her. But if making a dress form for you is completely and totally out of the question for whatever reason, I do have a video coming in either April or May that's going to be focusing more on pattern drafting and how to create a pattern in 2D instead of on a 3D surface. But if you are too impatient for that, I completely and totally understand. I also went ahead and linked a video to another content creator, The Closet Historian. Her content heavily focuses on pattern drafting. Even though she doesn't upload that frequently, she has a huge, informative back catalog of content that heavily focuses on pattern drafting. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and subscribe to her as well. And also, everything that I've learned about pattern drafting comes from her. Now, at this point, I iron my pattern pieces and clean up the lines using some lovely rulers and some Sharpie. But you know, this is a pattern piece. This is not the fabric I'm going to be using, so do not fret. I just want to make sure that my lines are clean and everything is just hunky-dory. While I may be chaotic, I do recognize that some order is absolutely necessary. Now, apparently sometimes I forget to film, and the majority of the footage you are currently watching is from early 2023. And I've become far more conscious of the fact that it's better to have excessive amounts of footage than not enough footage. Anyway, so my front panel pattern piece, I simply folded that in half vertically and cut it up the center. And I ended up just using whichever half of that I liked better. Now for this dress, the main fabric I'm using is a Duchess satin, which is more of a hefty satin. So I know that it's better to show than tell on YouTube or really any content creation platform, but yeah, this is another bit of footage I just didn't have. Editing a lot of this part of the video was kind of tough for me. I was like, curses, why, Eden, why? Yeah, I have sufficiently learned a lesson. So once I pinned my front panel onto the fold of my fabric, I went ahead, sketched it out, and then I added my seam allowance, which was about 1/2 inch. Then I began drawing out the skirt portion of this dress using the corner of my pattern as sort of like my anchor or point of origin. The skirt portion is about 21 inches long, so I went ahead and made several indicating marks on my fabric at varying degrees, and then basically just playing some connect the dots. Now I wanted a full skirt, so there is darn near a 90-degree angle at my waist on both sides of every panel, which has created a very interesting effect that kind of gives me like a French Baroque vibe, which is definitely how I felt after buying all that fabric. Baroque. In fact, it is astonishing how much I underestimated the amount of fabric I would need for this particular project. Initially, I only ordered 5 yards of this fabric. I don't know why I thought that would be enough. It obviously wasn't, so I went ahead and ordered another 10 yards of this fabric, which I still have some left over. I'll probably make like a corset or some lingerie in a future video. Anytime you are going to start a sewing project, make sure you get all the fabric you're going to need for that project, and it's better to have excess than not enough so that you can maintain consistency in color. Because when I ordered that second batch of that fabric, it very clearly came from a different batch of dyed fabric, so there is definitely a very glaring difference between the color of the fabrics. But you know what, this dress, I have learned a lot from her, and I am very grateful for her, and it just adds some more character. Now this is the one pattern piece that uses like a sane amount of fabric. Y'all, I cannot describe how much I hate pinning, but I recognize that it is definitely a necessary, monotonous good. because it really does help with consistency and preventing pattern distortion, because you don't want to cut out fabric and it be all janky, because it's going to mess with your fit later on. Despite my chaotic tendencies, I do genuinely want things to turn out nice, especially since I'm putting a lot of time and energy into them, and money. Once I cut out all of my pieces, I pin together any pattern pieces that have vertical relations. I find that doing this first will really help things line up better later on. Now, every time I begin and end a series of stitches, I backstitch, because I do not want my threads to become loose later on. It just helps to keep everything nice and secure. So once I sew my pieces that have vertical relations together, I start working on all of my pieces that have horizontal relations, which sounds pretty dirty, but it's not. Now, when I do this, I begin pinning at the waist and working my way out. Once again, I just find that this helps keep everything nicely aligned. Once everything was sewn together, I decided to make a partial lining for the bodice. So I start obviously by having the fabric good side to good side. And I begin pinning first by aligning my seams, making sure that my princess seam in the lining is aligned with the princess seam on the outer layer. Now, I will eventually do a zipper tutorial, but that's just not happening in this video because early 2023, Eden just apparently did not feel like really doing a good job on filming that. So alas, here we are. Once I had sewn the lining to the outer layer, I had to turn everything inside out. And I'm not going to lie, those straps were a struggle. Then I did some very questionable ironing. I was, and still am, learning. Y'all can probably tell how much I hate pinning, but by not pinning, I actually have made things harder for myself. I've said it before, I'm gonna say it again. There are no shortcuts in sewing, just detours. And those detours are not short. They extend the journey. So the shortcut is just to do it the right way. Now for some more very questionable decision making. I did not pin my hem. Now, when I don't do this, it's typically because I will use my index fingernail to measure the width of my hem. So just a little life hack, but also pin your hem. Also, I hemmed this before closing the back, which I would never do now, just because it's just not very pretty. But luckily the skirt is so full that you don't really notice, so it's fine. C'est la vie. I turn the end of the back straps inward and feed the front straps into the back straps. Then I wax my thread and get to securing these straps with some hand sewing. Now I think the stitch I'm using is a split stitch, but technical names are absolutely not my strong suit. Now when I reach the end, I tie a knot by looping the thread around my needle several times and pulling it taut. And I'll probably do this like maybe 2 to 3 times. And to really finish it off cleanly, I feed the needle through the fabric, pull it out, and cut it as close to the fabric as possible without obviously nicking the fabric so that there's no wild loose threads. I love that trick, and I learned it from Bernadette Banner. Then I closed the back of my dress and ironed the hemline, and the hemline went on forever. At least that's how it felt. So while I may not be particularly talented at pressing my seams, I still like to press my seams because it just makes everything look nicer. So at this point, the dress absolutely could have been done, but it just didn't feel done. And this weird bit of footage comes from the scrapped version of this series, which I'm pretty sure you will be able to understand why that was scrapped. Anyways, so this dress sat in my closet for about a year, whispering to me in the dark abyss, I am not done. So she wasn't done. So I clumsily seam ripped part of the neckline just above the breast. And I'm not going to lie, this footage is current and it is a little tough for me to watch because it is visually obvious that my arthritis is just really rough. Now I used some kind of organza ribbon in a light pink and lilac colors to create a 2-inch wide overlapping ruffles. I think I was feeling inspired by The Little Mermaid because it sort of has like this seashell vibe, but I'm also drawing inspiration from the 15th and 18th centuries, which I mean trends are cyclical, so. So once my ruffles were completed, I did a basting stitch so, you know, they would hold their shape and it would just make them a lot easier to work with later. Now turning the dress inside out, good side to good side, I placed my ruffles in between the lining and outer layers of the dress. I began by pinning the ends and then the center and then continue pinning. Once all that was pinned in place, I just did another basting stitch holding all the layers together, and then I ran it through my sewing machine. I really wanted to further embellish the neckline. I think I was feeling a little inspired by Elizabethan and Tudor fashions. I get inspired by some very strange things. Now for this, I'm going to be doing, I guess, like a spiral stitch. It's just a decorative stitch, but I'm using a gold cord, and every stitch is going to be the width of my thumb. And every other stitch is beaded. The pattern was seed bead, bicone, pearl, bicone, seed bead. And it's just some excess beads I had just laying around. I was like, oh, let me utilize these. Pretty. I like it. Why not? So my fabric not only has mismatched colors, but after cutting out that front panel, I noticed that there are scorch marks on the front panel from, I guess, the fabric being ironed in the factory or wherever it came from. And I'm like, it's right there on the front, and it's such an eyesore. So I figured, let's do something eye-catching that would distract from those scorch marks. So I decided I'm going to embroider this dress. Have I ever embroidered before? No, I haven't, but you know what? I'm already doing a lot of learning on this dress, so why not learn some more? So I sketched out an embroidery design taking inspiration from my Celtic ancestry. Then I pinned some tulle to the paper and traced my design with a Sharpie onto the tulle. After that, I pinned the tulle to my dress form, trying to make sure I was happy with the placement and made good contact with the fabric. At this point, I was mixing blue, yellow, and white acrylic paint, trying to make the perfect grain, so I could try to delicately trace the vines of my design, which was less than perfect. Then I mixed red, blue, and white acrylic paint, only to learn the red isn't quite a true red. There's obviously some yellow in this because I was trying to make a purple, but it just kept coming out gray. So yeah, not a true red. And I don't know why this is such a common problem. To paint the leaves, I started at the tip with very light pressure, and as I worked down to the widest part of the leaf, I just added more pressure, then once again releasing pressure to taper off the other end. At this particular point, I cut up some cotton macrame cord and pinned it to the shape of the vines and went ahead and stitched that on. Now, to embroider, my crazy self did not use embroidery floss. I decided to use 4 threads in various colors to create the illusion of my desired color. I used 1 strand of the fluorescent yellow green color, 2 strands of this more neutral soft green, and 1 strand of this blue. And it took me about 2 weeks to embroider the vines on both sides of this dress. For the leaves, I used 4 strands again and 3 different colors to achieve the illusion of my desired color. 1 strand of pink, 1 strand of sky blue, and 2 strands of this sort of dusty periwinkle color. And embroidering the leaves took about another 2 weeks. I know that some people might find that frustrating, but I find it genuinely enjoyable. So I typically only work on projects like this when I'm just in the mood to, when it feels good, because I want to stitch. I want every stitch to have the intention of joy, love, peace, dreams, etc. I want it to be imbued with a lot of positive energy. After all, this dress in particular probably has over 100 hours of my time put into it. So that's a lot of energy. So if I'm going to imbue something, it better be with something good, especially if I'm going to be the one wearing it. And at this point, I think we can sort of call it done. So on to the full reveal. I absolutely love this dress. I know that it's not perfect, but its character is absolutely beautiful. And I learned so much working on her. She has been a great teacher and a friend to me. Now with this dress, I do absolutely plan on further embellishing her. And if that is something that you would like to see, just let me know and I will create, I guess, a part 2 to this episode. Anyways, so because this episode put me off of my upload schedule by quite a bit, next episode is going to be super laid back and easy. That episode should be up Saturday, March 2nd. Thank you all for joining me for another episode of Making a Beautiful Life. I love you all oh so much. And remember, if you're going to believe in anything at all, why not believe in yourself?